My guest in this episode is Devdutt Pattanaik. Devdutt was trained in medicine and spent 15 years working in the pharma and healthcare industry, but over the past decade, he has been exploring mythology. And in this conversation, he explains to me the evolution of the idea of territory in ancient scriptures of India. What is the idea of Aryavarta and how does it relate to the geography of the modern Republic of India? How was social order and disorder understood in these scriptures? Thank you, Devdutt, for joining us for this discussion on the geography of India and how the mythical history or the memories that we created have played a role in the making of what we know today as India. So let us start by exploring what is the idea of Aryavarta that we...
So the word Aryavarta basically means the land of the Aryans.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a simple translation. But it's obviously not just a word, it's also a political entity.
Mm-hmm.
And as a political entity, it really emerges around 2000 years ago in India.
Mm-hmm.
But they're referring to an earlier period of time,
Mm-hmm.
3000 years ago, when Ram and Krishna lived in this mythical time, and they're harking back to that period, this golden age, you know. And around 2000 years ago, you have this idea of Aryavarta. And when you read the Dharma Shastras, which are the legal texts, the word Aryavarta emerges for the first time. Originally, Aryavarta only refers to the Gangetic region. Then as the Dharma Shastras keep becoming more and more popular across India, you find the later Dharma Shastras expanding this concept. So first it is only the Gangetic plains, then it is between the Himalaya mountains and the Vindhyas, then it starts talking about the seas on the eastern side and the western side. So suddenly you have got this expansion of this concept. So Aryavarta in Manusmriti refers to between the Himalayas and the sea. But again, this is around the 3rd century AD, that's 1700 years ago. But if I read the older Dharma Shastras, which is Gautama, Baudhayana, these are not talking about anything south of the Vindhyas. So clearly you're seeing this idea of Aryavarta shifting and expanding.
So over a period of 600 years roughly, which is from 3rd BC to 3rd AD, so you have an expanding conception of what constitutes Aryavarta.
Yes.
So what is Aryavarta? What is unique about Aryavarta according to that imagination?
So Aryavarta is imagining a great state. Arya is the noble way of being, which has come down from Brahma, which has come down from Manu, which has come from the Rishis, and they are creating this wonderful world order. And this is the time when the Aryavarta concept is spreading, Ramayana is spreading, Mahabharata is spreading, and the idea of Chatur Yugas, the 4 Yugas is... Kali Yuga is for the first time being referred to. People are using this word Kali Yuga. So I'm talking to you and saying this is Kali Yuga. For the first time people are hearing this word. This word doesn't exist in the Vedas. It exists only in these Shastras. And these people are the Shastris who are composing these books. And the Shastris are saying that the world went through these phases. There was this wonderful age and then it has got decayed and now we are living this age of decay and you can restore it to the great period of Aryas, if you follow what we are telling you to how to live your life.
Kali Yuga is when the order is being challenged. Due to various corruption of the real original...
Everything is going wrong. So what is happening? Now you look at the period when Dharma Shastras are being written. What has happened? You know, when you're talking about corruption, what's happening? Let's look at the world of the Dharma Shastras. One, the Brahmins have lost their relevance. The old fire sacrifices, what was described in the Srauta Sutras, in the Griha Sutras, all those big rituals that the Yagyas, the Ashwamedha Yagya, the Vajas, nobody's performing them anymore. That's gone. That's over. That world is over, which existed, say, roughly around between 1000 BCE and 500 BCE. So that world, nobody's sponsoring those yagyas anymore. Buddhism and Jainism is becoming popular, and we have this new monastic order of people traveling around talking about renunciation, and they're not, so that new intellectual ideas are emerging. It's also cosmopolitan. You suddenly are connected with Greece, you're connected with Persia, you're connected with Magadha, so the world has changed. It's a mercantile ecosystem. A mercantile ecosystem where people are traveling and trading, and suddenly the Brahmin has lost his space. This Aryavarta, the old way, the old agricultural, pastoral way, has lost relevance. And that is the Kali Yuga. And he's like, oh God, the world is collapsing. How do I bring it back to order? And therefore they come up with the idea of the Chatur Yuga, Chatur Varna, the 4 caste, or whatever you want to call it, 4 categories of people. You have Chatur Ashrama, the life has to be organized. You give life a purpose. So 4 stages of life. So suddenly 4, you give these lovely mnemonic, 4 ages, 4 groups of people, 4 stages of your life. So you suddenly meet this Shastra. Shastra means organized knowledge.
So there is a conception of time and the conception of an ideal society.
I have an ideal society. And it is being carried by these Brahmins roughly 2000 years ago from the Gangetic plain, migrating, radiating outwards.
Right. So the Kali Yuga is when the real pristine ideal society is being disrupted because of various influences and forces that are acting against it. And also Aryavarta, is it imagined as in opposition to the regions beyond it, which is Mlech?
No. So these ideas of Aryavarta and Mlecha, which normally people talk about, really emerged only in the 19th century. And in the 19th century, the conception of Arya was more Aryanism of Europe. And they had discovered this new word called Arya, and they were very excited about it. Now the word Arya technically only refers to 2 groups of people, the Persians and the Indians. It doesn't refer to Europeans. But if you lived, let's say 100 years ago, we would have used the word Arya to refer even to the Europeans. Until unfortunately the Nazis came along and suddenly Aryan became a bad word and no university wanted to touch it. It was cancelled. But till that time, so this Arya as a civilizing force is really a white imagination. And obviously Indians liked the idea of, so then the idea of the Brahmins civilizing the world, they were not doing that. They were just reorganizing a world. So it is not that they are civilizing, because when you talk of the Devas and the Asuras fighting, the Asuras are not seen as uncivilized. They are seen as people with a lot of wealth and power. It's just that you want that wealth and power. The Asuras are, the goddess Lakshmi is linked with the Asuras. She comes from Patal. So it's not this barbarians who have to be civilized. That's a 19th century white man burden idea, which has been imposed on the Brahminical structures. The Brahminical structures are coming and saying that, you know what, we can make a better world. It's more positivist rather than we want to destroy the old order. The old order didn't exist. There was no empire as such. And we talk, all the kings were turning to either to the Buddhists or to the Brahmins, and across India. So even in Cambodia, Vietnam, you have suddenly these big gigantic structures being built. One of the images that is built at this time is Varaha. Varaha is this wild boar who is raising the earth from the bottom of the sea. So when the Dharma Shastras are being written, what is the archaeological find at the same time? You have these images across Madhya Pradesh. You'll see in the Madhya Pradesh area, these Varaha images emerging, where he's raising the earth from the bottom of the sea. So that's the image of the king. Who is going to enable him to do it? The Brahmin. The Brahmin is going to be Brahaspati to Indra. And he is telling the king that, you can be Indra, you can create Swarga. I'll help you create Swarga.
I'll interrupt you there. So we'll get to how that radiating ideas of Aryavarta spreads into the geographies around what was originally imagined as Aryavarta. But before we get there, let me ask you, what is the difference between Aryavarta and Bharatvarsha, which is also part of, where does this reference to Bharatvarsha?
Yeah. So Bharatvarsha, the word for the first time is found in the Hathi Gumpha inscriptions in Odisha, and roughly about 100-200 years after Ashoka. So after Ashoka's famous Kalinga war, Ashoka is obviously a very powerful king, controls all the trade routes across most of India, not all of India, most of India, till Karnataka, not beyond Karnataka. I don't think he reaches Tamil Nadu or Kerala. So it's mostly Andhra coast and all that. So after him, there is this king called Kharavela, and we have got his inscriptions, which is near Bhubaneswar in the Udaygiri caves, and you have there he uses the word Bharatvarsha for the first time, and he really is referring to the Gangetic plain. So he is referring to this Gangetic, this old center of the Vedic tradition, which was the Gangetic plain, that region, as Bharatvarsha, which is exactly what is the original Aryavarta.
So there is no reference to Bharatvarsha, which is talking about the geographical entity, which is all the way up to the Peninsular
Later.
India. It's only later, not in the scriptures.
Not in the original.
not in-
See, it's sort of an expansive idea. It's a great idea, which is originally, again, they refer, when they use the word Arya or the word Bharat, both these words are coming from the Rig Veda.
Okay.
When I read the Rig Veda, I find the word Arya, but I don't find the word Aryavarta.
With the King Bharat and all?
Which Bharat again? Because Bharat is just a clan of people
Okay.
who really are fighting some wars in the Punjab, Haryana region, not even in the Gangetic plain. So, but you see, because Vedas are such a sacred book, I need legitimacy from a sacred book. So, somewhere around this time, and when they're referring to Aryavarta, when the early Dharma Shastras are being written, they are very clear. Bharatvarsha is the Gangetic space. And obviously, the king from Odisha is writing about Bharatvarsha. When Dharma Shastras, early Dharma Shastras are referring to Aryavarta as something North Indian, and we don't, even today 50% of India lives in the north, right? And really the Gangetic plains, 50% of India. Even then, in Gangetic plains was the bustling center. It was a world by itself.
Right.
And something that people don't understand. I don't think many people capture the magnitude of what you're saying. It's not like a little sliver of a Nile river valley. This is Gangetic plain is massive. And that is the world of Aryavarta. The South India and all don't have it. They're mountains and rivers. They are, perhaps there was like a glamorous thing about it, and the Brahmins are coming with this beautiful body of knowledge, and all the kings want them. So across India, and that's how it spread. So it's really referring to the Gangetic plain.
So how does that idea travel from Aryavarta? So first of all, let us clarify. So the idea of Bharatvarsha and Aryavarta are roughly replaceable.
Replaceable. They can be used together, and the early form is the what we
Aryavarta.
call today Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand.
Yeah. And which regions constitute that core? That idea, you say, is expanding.
Expanding.
In concentric circles.
Yes.
Okay. Say 100 years later, you have a more expansive idea of what is that geography. And then it expands all the way up to, including peninsular India, from the Himalaya to the sea.
And and since the Brahmins are now being taken to Thailand, they're traveling to Indonesia, Cambodia. So Afghanistan to Vietnam is what the phrase is used. It's called, writers call it the Sanskrit cosmopolis. That's the word which has emerged. Because this idea starts to spread and it's really become popular.
So is that the overlapping time when this Sanskrit cosmopolis is emerging, and the idea of with that, so as the Sanskrit cosmopolis is expanding,
Aryavarta is
also expanding.
The ideas are spreading. This idea of Aryavarta is spreading. But you see, we must clarify at this point, when I'm using the word Aryavarta, today we think of it as a uniform geographical space.
Right.
These people are thinking of a series of nodes.
Right.
It is a series of nodes and like multiple nodes. So there was one big node in Gangetic region. This node, then a new node is created, say in the Vindhya region. Another node is created in Bengal. Another node is created in Odisha. So these nodes, that's a good way of explaining. It's a node, it's a central point. Not as like a
continuum.
A continuum with one node. It's not a single node. It's polynodal.
Right.
It is what is called, it is not a single node which is spreading, like there is a mothership. There is no mothership.
So jumping a few centuries, today I think the Indians living in California is also, you can actually...
Yeah. They also call California as Kapilaranya.
Oh.
So you can create an Aryavarta in California. You can have a...
So that you're talking about the location of ideas, or people who subscribe to that idea, by virtue of their location there, that geography also gets that labeling. But there is a defined territory also emerging, right? In the sense that Aryavarta, between the Vindhyas and the Himalayas, and from sea in the west to sea in the east. And then later on, you also come across that from Himalayas to the seas in the south, and from sea to sea, which pretty much cover the India as it exists today.
Yes, but you see, it's a visualization. If I'm visualizing it, let's take a common example.
Right.
Let's look at the rise of the Islamic states. Right. You have something emerging from Mecca, and in the 7th century, which by the 10th century has spread from Spain to Sindh, right? But here the mothership is Mecca. They are not different, although there are warring tribes and all of them, but it remains, all of them agree that Mecca is the center. You don't say there is a Mecca in Sindh. You don't say there's a Mecca in Spain. You don't say there are hundreds of Meccas in the world. This idea doesn't exist. There is only one Mecca, there is only one Allah, there is only one prophet, and there is a one way of thinking. I want to use this model to explain the other model.
Yes,
Now you talk about Aryavarta, which is also expanding, but it is not that there is a mothership out there. There is this idea that Meru travels with you. So wherever the Brahmin will go, he carries Meru with him.
What is Meru?
Meru is the mountain from where the rivers will flow. Right. The rivers will give you fertility. The fertility will create prosperity. So the mountain will come, the river will come, the prosperity will come. So Lakshmi will come, power will come. So Durga will come. And then because you have wealth and power, you will attract talent, the poets, the Kavya literature. And therefore the Navratnas will come. And so you will create Swarga. And there will be multiple Swargas. So everywhere Ganga will travel. Everywhere Kailas Parbat will travel. So it is polynodal, not mononodal. So it's important to differentiate. The problem is in the 19th century when these ideas emerged, they were thinking in this... Even the Catholic Church functioned like this, right? There is one central church called Rome. See, until the Protestant Revolution happened, there was only the church. It's only the Protestant Revolution which sort of created new churches and the idea of a Lutheran church and a French church and a German church, and suddenly you have multiple churches emerging. They forced polynodal thinking in Europe. In the Middle East, there was always a single mononodal concept. While in India, it has never been mononodal. It is always.
Okay, so the ideas that originate in Aryavarta,
yes,
those ideas
radiate out.
Can you explain how?
So what is happening?
Where did it go? When did it
again, geographically, I mean, for simple understanding, we can say the narrative emerges around 2000 years ago. The simple way of understanding. How do we know this? One, textual evidence. We have got the Dharma Shastra texts. That is when the Ramayana and Mahabharata are written down. The writing has become important. Before that, writing is not important. Vedic corpus is oral. It's really the Shastra literature which is written down. And they'll always, one of the unique things about Shastra literature, whether it's Artha Shastra, Kama Shastra, Dharma Shastra, they will always say, there were many teachers before us. There were many teachers before us all the way to the Vedas. And they will trace it right to Brahma or to Manu or to Saptarishis. So it's a way of legitimizing themselves. But they're writing these texts, they're putting this thing together. Now, whether it's happening in a college, we don't know. We don't really know. But what we know is that around this time, you have these Varaha images appearing in the central, what is called Madhya Pradesh today. That region, all these statues, gigantic statues. Bandhavgarh recently, they found this gigantic statue of Varaha in the Jhansi Gwalior region is found. Around about 1700 years ago, you start finding, now when the Brahmins are going, now they need livelihood, right? Because they're bringing only intellectual ideas. Say a trader goes and brings material things. Your service provider, weaver brings, a skill. What does a Brahmin bring? He only brings an intellectual idea to a people who don't understand it. Because it's conceptual, it's highly conceptual.
Why is he going at all to begin with?
He has no food.
Okay.
It's employment. Okay. It's as simple as that. It's opportunity. He has nothing. His survival is based on the king. Even in the Vedic period, the earliest Vedic hymns are composed by kavis who depend on the king, the Raja. So Danastuti is the most important part of the Rig Veda, where he's like, thank you for giving me a cow, thank you for giving me grain, thank you for giving me a wife. So it depends. Like all poets around the world, like media houses in modern times, you need the king's, you need people's support, the king's support. So it's an intellectual activity which needs it. He doesn't have access to food, to put it bluntly. He doesn't have, market economy is not part of him, agricultural economy is not part of it. He has nothing. He only has his head. So you must admire these people. They are like explorers. They're traveling and they travel south. And then you have a new mythology of Agastya Muni traveling south. Agastya carrying the mountains, carrying rivers. These mythology emerges. So there's archaeology, there is mythology. Now I have land grants called Brahmadeya land grants. Land grants which are land being given to Brahmins, which is happening from the 3rd century AD, 17th century, 1700 years ago. We find these land grants emerging in central India and then gradually in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha. So South India calls it Brahmadeya, then the word Agraharam emerges. Odisha is called Sasana Gramo, so the village of the Brahmins. And these start emerging.
That is land endowment given to a community of Brahmins.
Who will enable the king to create Aryavarta in his zone. So king will be the Indra, and he will have a Meru, he will have a Ganga, he will create the Chaturvarana system, he will live by the 4 rules, so everything is happening. Now this is happening for quite quite some time. But as this idea expands, they have to innovate themselves. They have to keep innovating. So you have the local gods have to be incorporated. Everybody has their own tribal gods. The king has his own god whom he gives blood sacrifices to. Now the Vedas don't have idol worship, image worship, nothing of that exists. You have to incorporate this with your idea. It can't be pure intellect. The temple starts to emerge. And you suddenly find across India the great temple cities emerging. Tanjavur, Chidambaram, Madurai, Puri, Tirupati. These are all the temple cities which are emerging. And in fact, each temple dome is the Meru from where the rivers are flowing. So in South India, you can actually see, they'll always keep a pot on top of the temple that is capturing the Ganga, which is coming from the heavens, is being brought down in each of these lands, and every king. So the Chalukyas, the Rashtrakutas are Jain. As I said, Buddhists and Jains were also doing this. The Brahmins beat them to it. Because you see, the Buddhists and Brahmins were basically saying, at the end of the day, renunciation is better, Buddha is better. And the Brahmins, this is where the creativity and innovation came in. They said, our gods marry, our gods celebrate. So in the temples, you had musicians, dancers, singers. The gods were living like kings. So suddenly, the land, the kings, if I'm suspicious of the Brahmin, I won't give it to the Brahmin. They said, don't give it to us, give it to God. So Deva Bhoga emerged, and I will manage it for you. Because God can't talk, I will talk to you. Even today, the Brahmins, this whole right to temple movement is basically the temples all the temple lands were managed by the Brahmins. And they created this ecosystem. Now, one place is Odisha is where you have to see the painting, art, culture, everything zeroes in around this nodal center called the Jagannath temple. And this sort of culture emerges, the Navratnas emerges, the poetry, literature, everybody wants to come there. And it's a food-based economy. It's not a currency-based economy. So you get food. And what do you do the whole day? You sing, you dance, which you can't do in a Buddhist monastery. You can't do that in a Jain temple. But in a Hindu temple, the gods are having these festivals. They're going on chariot rides, they're going on boat rides, they are getting married, they're having quarrels, you're eating food. So they celebrate what is called the Purushartha. Again, 4 goals of life. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Social responsibility is important, success is important, money is important, artha, kama, pleasure is important. You have to have fun, you have to enjoy women and music and dance. So people love it. And then finally you have to balance it with moksha. So you see how structured this kind of ideology is. It's very appealing. It just really works beautifully across the country. And it spreads, as I said, it's fairly successful model. The Raja Mandala, it's called. Because there are nodes, each node is called a mandala, and there's a central temple, and there are temples to control the Samant, the circle of Samants, the circle of temples emerges. And this is what the model from, you could say, 2000 years ago to roughly around 500 years ago, honestly. Till the Mughals really come, it's still surviving in some form. And it really is adapted when the Muslims come to India. They don't completely reject the system. They like this system, but they have to work it with their Persian cosmopolis, which is coming in, with new vocabulary and ideologies coming in. But it's not broken. The more and more scholars are realizing there is a kind of further adapting.
So the corpus of literature that is being built between in those 600 years,
yes,
that is 3 BC
and 3 AD. 300 AD.
So that era is when including the Ramayana and Mahabharata are being the constitution written. So in those texts, in that corpus, how is peninsular India or what the peripheral India, the tribal regions, how are they?
So let's look at the Ramayana. Now, today when we talk about Ramayana, it is obviously Ram goes all the way to Rameshwaram, Tamil Nadu. But if you actually read the oldest Valmiki manuscripts, which are found in Pune, not in Pune, sorry, in Baroda. In Baroda's Oriental Institute. Mahabharata is found in the Pune institutes. You find that they're really talking about North India, and they don't go below the Godavari River. So all academic scholars know that the Ramayana story is really somewhere happening between Gangetic Plains and what is called Madhya Pradesh today, Amarkantak, that region. And they're obviously dealing with the Gond tribes, the Bhil tribes, and they're for the first time, you see, south for the Vedic Brahmin was a problem. Now let me explain this, and we have to understand geography for this. if you're coming southwards, what do you see? All rivers are flowing from the Himalayas to the Ganga. These are the Ganga feeders. They're flowing from north to south. Right. However, there is a whole bunch of rivers flowing from south to north, which are the rain-fed rivers, which are like Chambal, where Gwalior is located, and Betwa, the Madhya Pradesh rivers. They're coming from the Vindhya mountains. So Ganga has not just got snow-fed rivers, it's also got rain-fed rivers. So it's like this beautiful fern that is emerging. But South India, in order to go to South India, I have to cross the Vindhya mountains, the Amarkantak mountains, the Satpura range. I have to cross the Narmada river, the Tapi river. I have to deal with tribals, the Bhils and the Gonds who control this. There is this heavy forest called Dandakaranya, which is full of sal trees. Now, and is a Tropic of Cancer. There is a Tropic of Cancer passing, which means when I go to the south of the Tropic of Cancer, on certain days of the year, my shadow falls on the southern side. So from all Vedic angles, this is an inauspicious zone. That is why in the Vedas, Yamaraj lives in the south. South is the land of the god danger. Of dead and danger. It's to be feared. It's this terrible land far, far away. It's beautiful things are coming from there. Sandalwood comes from there because Karnataka is the land of sandalwood. So there is something beautiful over there, but to cross it, how do you cross Vindhya range? Today we have a railway lines going across, so we think we can just walk across. You can't. There is Bandhavgarh and all. If you go, you'll realize there's a pass, which even the British had to control because that's, you need mountains and you need armies to cross it. It's not easy. The Satvahan kings controlled the cotton highway from Andhra to Gujarat in the period which we are talking about, 300 BCE to 300 CE. I mean, most Indians have not even heard of the Satavahan kings. These kings controlled this land from Andhra Pradesh to Gujarat and Maharashtra, and they really controlled. And then the Guptas were from North India, the Vakatakas were from South India. The Guptas brought Hinduism, and their daughter married the South Indian Vakataka kings, and Kalidasa travelled across the Vindhyas, and so he wrote the famous Meghadutam. Because it was such a terrible thing to go south, he was like destroyed. Where am I being taken to the southern place? We don't realize this. Meghadutam is written by a man who is for the first time encountering South India. Probably. I mean, this thesis, you can argue whether it's true or not. But you can imagine the horror of him because he's suddenly come to a new land. But then the opportunities open up. Then you suddenly start seeing this is a new world, and you suddenly see new rivers, and that's when the Chalukyas emerge and the Rashtrakutas emerge. So we have to understand this journey to the south is so in the like Ramayana, they refer to Lanka having sal trees. Now sal tree is only found in Madhya Pradesh and Odisha. It is not found in Sri Lanka. So when Valmiki is writing, he describes Lanka as full of sal trees. Where is this? Sal trees has to be somewhere near Godavari river. He never refers to Kaveri. He never refers to Krishna. They don't refer to it at all. So when did the south become part of Ramayana scripture? Now, when Cholas become the king, ruling Tamil Nadu, the Coromandel coast or the Chola Mandalas, about 1,000 years ago. So 1,000 years ago.
That is sometime in the middle of this 600 years we are speaking about.
After this, 400 years after.
400 years after the conclusion of that 600 years.
So this period, the migration has started. They've reached, the Chalukyas, the Pallavas, the Cholas, and now Brahminism is becoming a very important thing. And now Ramayana has sort of appeared in the Sangam poetry, has started appearing in Alvar poetry, has started appearing in, but there's no Ramayana epic. The Tamil epic of Kamban is written only 1,000 years ago, and he writes in the Chola Mandalam. So the moment you become a king, how do you prove that you are a king? You get a poet in your local language to write the Ramayana. So Chola king writes the E Ramavataram, Kamban writes it. Even in the, as late in the 13th century, or I don't know exactly, the Thai king who is Buddhist, when he becomes king, writes the Ramakiyan. 17th century, sorry. He writes the Ramakiyan. So even today when you go to Thailand, Ram plays a very important role. So Ram became the symbol of kingship. But now Chola Mandalam, now Cholas are fighting Sri Lankans because he wants metal, copper from there. And all these Chola bronzes need copper. Where is copper available in India? It's available in Sri Lanka. He hates the Sri Lankans because the Sri Lanka is the land of Buddhism. So they are the other. How do you call the other? Rakshasa. So Sri Lanka then becomes the Ravana's land. And in a way you can see that the Buddhists sort of accept it because they have this book called Lanka Avatarana Sutra, where Buddha comes and gives knowledge to Ravana, and that is a Sri Lankan text. So around 1000 years ago, you suddenly see Sri Lanka becoming Ravana's Lanka, the land of gold, because that's where copper is being found, not gold actually.
So the theater of Ramayana also goes on expanding from the heartland part of what is today Madhya Pradesh all the way.
Yeah, because see, for Valmiki it is south, and this is a southern journey itself is a traumatic, is a brave thing to do. He's crossed the Tropic of Cancer, literally, and gone to the land of the Rakshasas. This stretch now goes right up to Cholamandalam. It goes up to Rameshwaram, Dhanushkodi, that place, in 10th century. Then in the 14th, 15th century, when the Vijayanagar Empire takes place in the Andhra, Karnataka region, they said this is... So Ram has become powerful in the first. So you have to see history through space, through time, and Ramayana is now the epic by this time, because everybody is using the Ramayana. Even Thailand is using it, Cholas are using it, Vijayanagar kings are using it, the Odisha kings have used it. When Kablendra Gajapati is becoming, he starts writing the Ramayana. But all the Ramayans in Odisha refer to local things. They don't... Wayanad Ramayana exists in Kerala, which as far as Wayanad Ramayana is concerned, everything, Ayodhya, everything is in Kerala. There's nothing outside Kerala. If you go to Ayutthaya in Thailand, they will say Ayutthaya. It's Ayodhya. Their capital is Ayutthaya. It's called Ayodhya. So Ram is an idea. Yes, it's not the geographical thing that we are seeing today. This is very modern conception. I think Indians were very conceptual and we were very comfortable carrying concepts. Even today, we are a conceptual people.
What were the concepts or the social order that Aryavarta imagined?
So, the good things are that brings prosperity, Svarga. That you have to create these nodes, and therefore Raja Mandala has to be created. So the village is imagined as a circular pattern, where the center is the center of power, the temple, and the temple and the king were together. So Kovil means temple, Kovil also means palace. So if you see many of the, like for example in Trivandrum, the temple is far more dominating than the palace. Even if you go to Puri, the temple is far more important than the king is a servant or a governor, a raut of the king, of the deity. The Brahmin stays nearby, and then after that is the market space. Now look how the geography is emerging. So I have got the purest of the pure and the most powerful right in the center. Around it is the economic spaces. The rich people are living, the elite. This is the South Delhi or South Bombay or whatever you want to call it, spaces. And then you have the peasants living, the peasants and the farms emerging. But then comes the periphery. And the periphery this is where the Aryavarta starts getting a dark idea, the idea of purity. This is not there in the early scriptures. It comes much later. And the idea of this is pure, this is impure, this is polluted. And the idea that the temple is accessible only to the purest of the pure. So the Brahmin has positioned himself as the purest of the pure because he spends the whole day chanting the Vedic mantras. And therefore he is allowed to enter the sanctum sanctorum. The king can enter till a point, then others can go far. But somebody cannot enter the temple because only then you can justify the presence of the pure. There has to be a opposite, the impure. And this is where untouchability as an idea emerges. And while you have ritual untouchability and pollution, the early texts, the later texts, suddenly you start having this idea of the person who is not allowed to enter the temple. In Alvar poetry, in Nayanar poetry, you have these sages. Suddenly you have these sages who are not allowed to enter the temple, or you have to burn themselves or become fire, that God turns around and the temple breaks open. So you have seen this tension emerging. And this is the dark idea of Aryavarta, which starts, they say 5th century AD is when you start seeing it. So 1500 years ago. It amplifies itself 1000 years ago.
So how does it then find their way into Dharma Shastras? They don't?
In Dharma Shastras, they are talking about the Chaturvarna. They are talking about, so you find suddenly this idea, untouchability is not very clearly referred to, but hierarchy is mentioned. Till where you can come, what you can do. So hierarchy is mentioned. See, untouchability is a very slightly different idea. And normally in India we confuse caste with caste, varna is these words, with untouchability. I like to separate these two words for my understanding. Because caste is an idea, or jati as an idea, which is based on endogamy, has been around in India in different forms, in different groups, right from Harappan times. It is codified using varna language by Manusmriti and the Dharma Shastras, and they sort of take this local structure, but they position themselves on top. They're saying, hey, this structure is there. They categorize all the jatis. There are thousands of jatis. They say, okay, let's categorize them into 4 groups. So we have got the first group of the Brahmins, we, on top, intellectual capital. The second group is the landowners, so the Kshatriyas. Then the market economy, which is the trading group, which was always a little bit hesitant to like them because they preferred the Buddhists and the Jains mostly. But then as in Tamil Nadu, the Chettiyars and all that, they control the temple also. And then you have the Shudras, who are basically service providers. It's a simple way to understand. Shudras is all service providers. If I provide you a service, a weaver, a potter, all of them will come in this group. But now comes this 5th group. Like you can say 4A and 4B, or you can say 5, depending on who is writing the text. So all textbook writers write it. Some people say it's not Avarna, not Savarna and Avarna. This new group emerges, which is doing dirty jobs. So associate with death, associate with sanitation, associate with leather. That's why, and you find this discomfort with bodily fluids. Emerging, and it sort of builds to the point that a group of people are seen so dirty that they cannot enter the village. They cannot be seen, they should not come when the sun is high because the shadow will fall. They have to spit, and these kind of practices are amplified around the 16th and 17th century. You find actual documentation of this. When the Mughal Empire is collapsing and the new Maratha and Rajput kingdoms are rising, you have these legal texts where you have this very clear documentation of people who are not allowed to enter the city. They are Muslims and these group of people, Achep in Gujarat or Achut. This word starts being documented very clearly, 70. And then the British come and then they sort of use the bureaucratic process and they sort of consolidate it even further. So you really find this amplified in the last 500 years, I feel. It's really amplifies itself, and that's the dark side of Aryavarta. Other than that, everything was prosperous and lovely, and you have this great culture emerging, music, art, culture. But this side, which sort of is, I think, and that's the Achilles heel which the British used to attack the Brahmin order, because they loved the Brahmin order as to a point. And the moment they used the Brahmin lobby to destroy the Persian lobby when the British came to India. But once the Persian lobby had been wiped out, now they had to attack the Brahmin lobby.
Because they were emerging as
they were becoming
challengers.
The Arya, they were friendly, brotherhood and all that. And suddenly the Brahmins have become too powerful and they're asking for equality and rights. How dare they? And so suddenly this amplification of the caste system starts and the conversations of caste start. And now the Brahmins go on a defensive. And that is the rage that we see across the country even today. So you see this historical journey which you find over time.
We have this idea that Shankaracharya is unifying or reviving Hinduism. So is Shankaracharya using, or the text associated with Shankaracharya, using the word Hinduism, or what is his whole notion about the Adi Shankara traveling from Kerala northwards? Now, until now we were talking about the ideas that traveled from the north to the south.
Yes.
Now this in Shankaracharya, this notion that ideas traveled from south to north. Can you explain that?
So let's see a parallel. Around 2000 years ago, you have these Shastris who are saying a long, long time ago, there lived this wonderful king called Ram, whose life has been documented by a person who witnessed it, called Valmiki. So Valmiki is the witness. That's why it's called Itihas. By the way, the word Itihas means witnessed narratives. Puranas are non-witnessed. Nobody has witnessed them. So stories of gods cannot be witnessed, but stories of kings can be witnessed. Vyasa witnesses the Mahabharata, which, by the way, the story of the Mahabharata is only in the Haryana and the Gangetic Plain region. So Vyasa witnesses the Mahabharata and Valmiki witnesses the Ramayana. So in 2000 years ago, they're harking back to something which happened several thousand years ago, and they're justifying the current based on that. Like, you should be like those great kings. That's a role model that everybody has to follow. And clearly Ram emerges as the great tapasvi Raja, the king who works for other people, who doesn't hoard things for himself. So that's a very noble idea, which even today people find it very difficult to, the hermit king. The hermit king or the tapasvi Raja is the acme thought over there. Okay, so that's 2000 years ago. 1500 years ago, Islam enters India, And I mean, they've come 1,000 years ago, Khilji comes to, but really the big powers are the Mughals. And roughly at that time, the Vijayanagar Empire emerges. And you see Vijayanagar Empire at loggerheads with the Mahamani Sultans. And Vijayanagar emerges as a place of rejuvenation and where the Math culture starts. So while, remember when I spoke of Hindu gods getting married, Brahmins had families, they were householders because they were fighting the Buddhists. And therefore the Buddhists were the hermits, Hindus were the householders, and the ideal king was a hermit householder. But now the Buddhists have gone. The hermit ideology is absorbed into Hinduism, and you have these monasteries called the Mats, which by the 14th and 15th century have become big, really nurtured in the Vijayanagar Empire. And these mathas are the centers where Vedic culture is being protected, because the Vedas are being, for the first time, Sayana is documenting the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda. The kind of documentation which happens in 14th century Vijayanagar period is unprecedented. So all the texts that we refer to today are really written around that time. Even the oldest book, I mean Ramayana, if you say, it will be that period. So Vijayanagar kings played a very, very important role, right? Now in this time, for the first time, around this time, you have the Brahmin Mathas talking about this person called Shankaracharya. So Ramanuja, for example, who lives in the Kaveri Delta, in his works you find him arguing against this man who wrote about Nirguna. He spoke of Nirguna, that he spoke of a formless God. And Ramanuja talks of temple culture. So he obviously is talking Saguna. So temples are important. So they're arguing against this person about whom we know nothing. Then Madhvacharya is also doing the same thing around the 12th, 13th century. Then around that time, you have the first biographies of this man being written, called Shankaracharya. And we are told that he traveled and and while everybody talks about him defeating the Buddhists, really the story talks about him defeating Vedic Brahmins, the Mimansikas, who follow the old Vedic rituals. There are very few references to, nobody knows what he actually argued with the Buddhists. Everybody talks about Buddhists, but really he is arguing against the old Vedic fire ritual culture. Mimansikas. Now these are technical things to be known. He's talking in favor of the Upanishads, and he's talking about philosophy, and he's introducing this philosophy, but he's not talking about temples. He doesn't like temples too much. Ramanuja likes temples too much. So suddenly this man becomes important. So Advaita as an idea, not two. Advaita doesn't mean one. It means not two, which is a subtle, and that's a philosophical conversation. He brings this idea. And now we are talking about this man who traveled across India, went to Kashmir, and you have this Digga Yatra, he went to Puri, and then there are the stories that he goes to Bihar, and he goes to Kashi, and he goes to Badrinath, and he goes to Kashmir. These are all the Brahmin centers where he's traveling. He's like Superman, going and this idea. Now, this purpose of Shankaracharya was really to help the Mathas establish their legitimacy. But in the 19th century, when we are imagining the idea of India and the idea of Hindu Rashtra, and these new ideas are emerging of nation, how do you get a person to unite everybody? And Shankaracharya becomes, because Advaita can be seen as one idea. It's almost monotheistic, and it sort of helps you homogenize Hinduism. And he's man, he is celibate, he is traveling across India. So there's something beautiful about him. So the Indian national movement adopts him, the way they adopted Buddha. But they are constructing these Buddhas. These are the, you know.
So what Shankaras, the corpus around Adi Shankara, they are being written in 13th century, 14th century.
Yes.
About a person who had lived
in the 8th century, in the 7th century.
So even according to their account, it is 500, 600 years later,
yes,
they are writing about somebody who lived.
Yeah, I don't think they knew it was 500 years ago. Right. They didn't know it was 500 years ago. They just knew there was once a man who from Kerala traveled northwards. See, it's the trajectory now. Till now we are talking about people moving southwards. Around this time, the conversation is of people moving northwards. From the Vijayanagar period, suddenly these conversations of holy men traveling north. Because south has become the center of Hinduism. The Mathas have become the center of Hinduism. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu goes north, Vallabhacharya goes north, Ramananda goes north, Shankaracharya went north, the original person.
Right. So, is it appropriate to see this movement from north to south and then south to north as a kind of ideas about Aryavarta, let us call it Brahmanism, traveled south. So in the south, it actually evolves into a new form.
New form.
and then it travels north, which is actually becomes a challenge to the ideas of priesthood that existed in the north even then. Is that
No,
what is
see,
happening?
the north was always the sacred space. There's something about the Ganga which unites Aryavarta.
Right.
Because it's the river which came from the heavens.
Right.
And it flows in the north. So even the south, the pilgrim traditions, the trading routes would always talk about the north, the river Ganga. And therefore Dakshina Ganga, Dakshina Kailas, Dakshina Kashi. It's never... So Dakshina Kashi. So Kashi is important, then Dakshina Kashi, Uttara Kashi, but Kashi is important. So Kashi is this center. It remains center. And it's an important romantic idea. But by the time Muslims have come in, this North Indian space, the Brahmins are on a back foot. They were reduced to bureaucrats and working in... They were not as powerful as they were in the south. The mathas were in the south. There is no North Indian maths, that kind of mathas emerging. So you need the sponsor, right? It all depends on sponsorship. You need, and who brings these sponsorships? So in Gujarat, Vallabhacharya establishes this, he establishes in Vrindavan, and during Aurangzeb's time it travels to Gujarat. So the Gangetic plain is sort of reclaimed in the 15th, 16th century by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his students and Vallabhacharya. So this kind of a bhakti movement emerges, and suddenly Kashi is reclaimed, Mathura is being reclaimed, Ayodhya is being reclaimed. These spaces are being reclaimed around the 15th, 16th. You see these movements of people remembering and saying, this is where Krishna danced, this is where... so this becomes, it's a revival movement which starts to happen around that time.
So how are they seeing South as a safer place for Hinduism by then?
At that time. Because clearly, as I said, the wealth is there, sponsorship is there. Basically, the sponsor is in the south, not in the north. Right. Even remember, for example, if you go to Vrindavan, they will talk about Ramanand and Ramanuj. Ramanuj is the saint who came from the south. His student is Ramanand. Ramanand is the person who inspires Ravidas, Guru Nanak Ji, Kabir. All these great saints of India are inspired by a guy called Ramanand. Mysterious person about whom we know not, but his name comes everywhere. Ramanand is a student of Ramanuj, who is from the south. But there was a division later in the Kumbh Mela Chronicles. You see, they want to distance themselves from the Sri Vaishnavas of the south. They want to establish a new North Indian identity. The Ramanandis, they are called. Ramanandis say we are not Ramanujis. So there is this kind of a autonomy emerging even in the North India. So that difference is definitely there. When you see the Ramanand Ramanuja story, you see this. Or for example, Vallabhacharya, who's Srinath Ji in Rajasthan. His roots are from Telangana or probably Andhra Pradesh, but nobody talks about it much. He's localized now. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is from the eastern part of India, who goes to the North India. But Mirabai, if you ask North Indians about Andal, they've never heard of her. South Indians don't know of Mirabai. Again, because Hinduism has always been a local manifestation of a global narrative. This local manifestation is where the power lies.
So it is only material factors that make South India a more safe place for the tradition.
It seems like that. It seems like that because I mean, I'm sure there's other scholarship out there, but my scholarship is whatever I have read. I noticed that it is the Vijayanagar Empire which plays a very important role in the revival of Hinduism from the 13th century onwards. Before the 13th century, really Hinduism has gone into a kind of a dormant state. Cholas against South. North India, you have got the... which kings you have? Harshavardhan, 7th century. So between Harshavardhan, 7th century, who becomes Buddhist. So 7th century, you have the Chinese chronicles, is really Buddhist. The Pala kings of Bengal are Buddhist. The South Indian kings, the Hinduism center is really in the south. The Chalukyas, Ellora caves, all the art which we call is really in the south. The only other place in the north is Kashmir. So the oldest images of Vishnu, while they are found in, as I said, in south, the other place which I will mark is not the Gangetic plain, it's Kashmir. So it's Kashmir is where I find these images. So Kashmir was the center of learning, Brahminical learning. It was like the universities. Students from South India would go there to learn Vedanta. Students from East India, Odisha, many of the temple rituals of Puri temple were perhaps based on texts which were Tantric texts which were written in Kashmir. So 13th, 14th, 15th century, Kashmir is this little place sort of where Brahmanism thrives, maybe Kashi, a little bit of it, but then it's the Mathas of the south.
Right. So this idea, the pilgrimages that become very important, is that how do they emerge, and are only Brahmins going on these pilgrimages, or is it a popular thing? Who actually goes?
So all pilgrimages. I'll give you something interesting about the pilgrimage. Pilgrimages to there is basically trade routes across India. Trade routes wherever trade is successful. Like for example, Khajuraho is this beautiful temple complex, but there is no city around it. And you wonder, why did a king build a Khajuraho temple with beautiful carvings in the middle of nowhere? Reach it is also difficult today, because at one time there was a trade route over there. The trade route goes away and the temple loses its importance because it loses its wealth. And same thing happened with Nalanda. It was not like destroyed by Muslims or anything. It just lost the trade routes shifts. And this is something we have to understand. So even when we're talking about pilgrim spaces, they're related to trade routes. People travel and then trade routes emerge. So for example, when we talk about Char Dham, let's look at the Char Dhams. You have Rameshwaram, you have Puri, you have Dwarka, and then you have Badrinath. They don't talk about Kashmir. I always wonder why the fourth Dham should have logically been Kashmir, by pure logic, but it's not, it's Badrinath. And then one of my friends pointed out that please see what is beyond these places. Beyond Rameshwaram is Buddhist land, Sri Lanka, Buddhist. It always maintained its autonomy through Theravada Buddhism, its own unique form of Buddhism. You go to Puri, what is beyond that? Again, it was Buddhist land, because the Pala kings were Buddhist, and after the Pala kings, then when Islam comes, the whole region becomes Islamified, which is other. When you go to Badrinath, you see what is beyond that is Tibet. Beyond Badrinath is Tibet. And it's a very trading route, by the way. Borax used to come from there. Borax is a chemical which was used around the world, and it would only come from Tibet, and it came from Badrinath, Kedarnath, from what I know from scholars. And then Dwarka, beyond that is Sindh, again, which was controlled by the Muslim kings. So these four spots mark where the other thing happens. Now the pilgrims are traveling to places which is holy, where the gods exist. So these are also the places where the melas take place. Like for example, let's look at Puri. The Jagannath Rath Yatra is a spectacle. Everybody travels there at that time. Local people travel, merchants travel, and then they came up with this concept called pilgrim tax. If you come for this ceremony, you have to pay a small tax. But that became a huge source of revenue, which everyone from the Mughals to the Hindu kings to the Mughal kings to the East India Company loved it until it was banned. So pilgrimage is also a source of income. It is not just holy land, it is pilgrim tax which you have to pay. And that becomes a source of income. It is not it's a different kind of income. And that is encouraged. Now the Brahmins encouraged pilgrimages a lot, because it is at the pilgrim spot that the Ramayana and Mahabharata was narrated. This was where they would talk about this Aryavarta concept. So I'm working all day, I don't have time to listen to all this. I'll go to the pilgrim spot, I spend 3-4 months there, because in those days I live there. There is a Puranikas, they are called the Puran Pandits, who will tell you the Ramayana, who will tell you the Mahabharata, who will tell you about Aryavarta, who will tell you about this wonderful period, this 4 goals of life, 4 categories of humans. Suddenly your life gets more structured. It's like going to nowadays, self-help groups and listening to these people. And that's what pilgrimages did. So pilgrim spots, you will have at pilgrim spot, you will have Buddhist, Jain, Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, so all of them there, and gradually dargahs started to appear. When Muslims, Sufi saints started to travel, they also figured out these routes, and they started doing dargahs started appearing over there. So across India, like Bombay has Buddhist sites, Jain sites, Hindu temples, and you have dargahs. And so you see this, everything coming together in a trading city called Bombay. Otherwise, why would Bombay is not there in Ramayana and Mahabharata? How does Bombay have all these places? So pilgrim spots sort of capture the economic power, the political power, all that happens over there.
In 19th century, you are repurposing a whole lot of this myths and history and other things for a modernist project. So what are the identifiable trends in that?
Now this is an interesting thing. So and one of the things scholars I realize is that they jump they assumed the 19th century scholarship was very accurate. So 19th century India was very different from 21st century India. So when I am giving you all these things, you won't find this in the writings of Vivekananda. Because Vivekananda didn't even know about Harappa. Because when he died, Harappa had not been discovered. You know, genetic DNA studies that we have today, where I'm so confidently saying males came, is 2010. So all this scholarship which I'm telling you, or the fact that, you know, how the temples were designed and how agriculture, these are historians of the last 20 years who have come up with these ideas. We genuinely were told that Ashoka was Buddhist and who spread Buddhism everywhere. Patrick Olivelle has written a book saying that, well, it's not as simple as you think it is. This king was just, yes, he was Buddhist in leaning, but he was not a Buddhist missionary the way we imagine it. That is a construction of the Buddhist writers of the later times. So our scholarship is very different. Now, 19th century was shaped, they didn't like the word religion because science was emerging. So they wanted to distance themselves from religion. So they need, but you see, religion was telling them slavery is bad. Now, let's take an example of slavery. So religion, and really we forget that it is religion which stopped slavery across the, you know, the churches said that this is evil and this is wrong. Now you have to just, now slavery is free labor. And how do you replace that with, you came up with a new concept called race. And scientists came together to give you a new conceptual framework to enslave people. So suddenly slavery became important and became scientific. So from, you are, before that it was, we want to civilize you, you were savages. Before that it was heretics who was harvesting your souls. So I have got different technologies to enslave you, right? Now we have different technologies to enslave, it continues. So you have this race as an idea emerging and the idea of nation emerging. Nation didn't exist before empires, right? The European empire, British empire didn't think of nations, they thought of empires. Nations is a 200-year-old idea because of USA coming up with the republic, you know, America declaring itself, and it's a revolution. And everybody started creating these nation states. So India now wants to create a nation, but the question is, how do you draw the borders? Where does it start? Where does it end? Because as I said, India is polynodal. You know, Kerala, even Kerala as we call it, has 3 different nodes within it. The North Kerala is different from South Kerala. You go to Odisha, there is one node called Puri, but there is another node called Jajpur. You know, Andhra Pradesh has multiple nodes. So how do you put them all together? You need a grand narrative. And this is what emerges. This is what people are now thinking about it. So you have the founding fathers of the nation. Tilak plays a very important role. He uses the word Swarajya, which comes from the Rig Veda. In Rig Veda, the word Swarajya appears. So again, you legitimize yourself using the Rig Veda. The word Swarajya is a word, there's 2 words in Samrajya and Swarajya. Now in Vedas, it has a different meaning. It doesn't mean independence. Swarajya means entrepreneurship. The entrepreneurial king, Indra, goes and establishes Swarajya and gets wealth. And then it is organized in a Samrajya by Varuna. So, you know, in the old days, the pastoral community, you would go and get the cows through war, Gavasthi, that is Swarajya, an independent entrepreneur going and start a startup. And then creating a consolidated Samrajya. But in the 19th century, Samrajya has a different meaning. It refers to the British. And Tilak is saying, I want Swarajya. I want to be independent. So the meaning has been changed, but the words are Vedic. And it's a fabulous, I think it's just brilliant because they know it connects in India. India, you say the word Veda, you say the word Buddha. Like in Buddhist, you have to say Buddha said so. Did Buddha say so? We don't know. But Buddha said so. Nowadays you have Ratan Tata said so. Ratan Tata seems to be making a lot of quotes which nobody's heard of. But that's how you legitimize it. You just put, or Confucius said so. So Veda said so. And this is the time when new ideas are emerging. Should India be, the religion becomes important again. British realize that how do we destroy these people, and they start using the religious communal divide and rule policy, caste policies. These are the ways to attack India. So India is attacked using the caste language. Hindus are attacked using the caste language. Hindus are attacked using the communal language of Islam, and you know. So this, in this ecosystem, you need a grand unifying narrative. And 2 narratives sort of emerge, right? One is the Hindu Rashtra narrative, which is saying India is a Hindu land and is tracing the history of Hinduism. And the other says, well, the Muslims came later, and therefore they're outsiders. But this faces a problem with the Aryan theory, because Aryans also came from outside and they brought the Sanskrit language from outside. Hence you see this almost virulent attack on the suggestion that the Aryans came from outside. It's terrible in India if you say that. I've been personally attacked a lot of times. You're not allowed, even if the genetic evidence is there, you have WhatsApp University arguing that all these people are conspiring against you. But then you have the idea of India, and there's a new noble idea of secularism, justice. Now this is trying to immediately transform our people who have lived in hierarchical religious societies into a new, suddenly they're going to sort of reboot themselves and forget their caste, their language, their religion, and become Indians, magically. And therefore the constitution is being written. And since Indians are familiar with the Dharma Shastras, we accepted the constitutions very easily. I was speaking to a constitutional lawyer. I said the speed with which Indians accepted the constitution is unusual globally. You give caste has to be accepted, religion has to be accepted, language diversity has to be downplayed. But now the idea of India comes in opposition to it, and today we see this confrontation playing out in different forms.
Right. So we conclude with one or two questions. So who are the people that are living here? You refer to the movement of people from Central Asia into this place. Who call themselves Aryas.
Yes.
And now, as you said, any suggestion of an Aryan inward movement into India is now offends people.
Yes.
But what do we know, or what we learned new in the last 10, 12 years?
So to put it in context, this comes from this race theory. 19th century race theory, every nation is a race and a tribe and we all are genetically homogeneous. This whole idea of purity comes in. Remember, India loves the idea of purity, and this idea, across the world you have this idea of pure Pakistani and a pure Muslim and a pure Jew, and genetic studies have destroyed this. And the problem. Now, genetic studies are telling us that we know that in India, people weren't born in India like vegetables, right? They didn't come from the earth. They came from somewhere. And as per the knowledge we have, is about 50, 60,000 years ago, we have the out of Africa migration taking place, and India was a major route of transmission. And memories of that period are still there in India. The fact that we use retroflex sounds. If you go to Australia and speak to Aborigines or listen to Aborigines speak, you will think they're speaking Tamil. Because they sound tut, 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 sounds like tut, tut, dur, dur will be heard by Aborigines in Australia, by Papua New Guinea, because that sound came with the African people and remains in India about 50,000 years ago. Then about 10,000 years ago, you have Iranian farmers coming to India and bringing wheat cultivation to the Sindhu region, what is called the Sindhu region now in Pakistan, but part of it is in India too. So that part has got new kind of thing. And this while the wheat cultivation is happening over here, another group of people are coming from Vietnam, Southeast Asia. They're the Munda people. They're called the Austroasiatics. And they're bringing rice, wet rice cultivation. Not rice cultivation, wet rice. Wet cultivation of rice. And so you have wheat growing on, what is today Rajasthan and Gujarat side. And you have got rice being cultivated in Bengal, Odisha, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh. Now, suddenly you have about the Harappan civilization appearing over there, which trades with other parts of the world. Trades with Persia, trades with different parts of India, but nothing has changed genetically over here now. You've got the Mundas from this side, you have the Iranian farmers, you have the out of African. Harappa stops, one day stops, and then the people from Harappa start to migrate. Some of them migrate to south, so therefore you find some Harappan traits in Tamil Nadu, and Sangam poetry has some memories of Harappan period. But then about 3,500 years ago, horse has been domesticated and a chariot, and we know that horse was domesticated 4,000 years ago only. So roughly when the Harappan civilization, and these are new ideas, you don't find this in, Russian scientists found this in the 1970s, and that's why we don't have it. And these people from Eurasia, they came with a horse, they came with a chariot, they came to what is called BMAC, Bactria Morgiana archaeological complex in Central Asia. They lived there for about 2-3 generations. This is where the Arya word emerged. This is where the word Soma emerged, Yagya emerged, and these two people migrated from here in two groups. One went to Persia, so they use the word Arya. Even Iran word comes from Arya, so Iran means Aryan. And the word came in the 1930s under Nazi influence. The king of Persia changed the name because he was so inspired by the Aryan racist ideology. So the Iranians love the word Aryans and Indians love it. Now, Indians also got the word Aryan. This happens 3,500 years ago. Mostly men have come in and they marry the local women in India, and therefore you find that genes mostly North India. It's called the ancestral North Indian gene, mostly in North India and mostly in the Brahmin and upper caste communities of South India.
So the higher you are in the Varma caste order, the higher the proportion of the Arya genes
being present, even today.
Right. But we are also seeing that the original Harappan genes or the population, genetic studies show that a larger proportion of their population moved south.
Well, significant. Large, small is a very difficult thing to say. We do know that there is definitely a modern, not all Harappans, but the southern, even Harappa was multiple cultures.
Right.
I'll give you an example. I spoke to a linguist. In Hindi, we say aap, tum or tu. These three levels, right? Normally in languages, you have two levels. Like in French, you have vous and tu. In English, you have only one, you. But in French, you have two. And normally feudal societies, there's a master and a servant. But Hindi has three levels. Why? Where did this? Sanskrit doesn't have it. But you and I, you speak Hindi, aap, tum, tu, three levels. It doesn't exist in Sanskrit, the mother language. Where did these three forms come from? Probably Harappa. So we are probably having some memory of the Harappan sound. Right. The Dravidian sound, we know that there is this kind of a language movement happening. It definitely there. There's the Munda, which is coming from the east, which is people don't talk about. Munda is from the east. Dravidians move south. Aryans are in northwest India. So it's a mix. It's like a mixed thing happening. So the genes, Tony Joseph has written a lot about the genetic structure of it. But we know that North India had what is called ANI and South India has ASI, ancestral South Indian gene, and they mingled and mixed with each other until 2000 years ago. And then endogamy starts. So to what we call caste endogamy, not marrying outside the caste, prohibition of intercaste marriage, is less than 2000 years old. It may have been there in some pockets, like there are certain communities, I think the Vaishya community of Andhra Pradesh, where they've traced it at 3000 years ago, endogamy has been there. But across India, endogamy was not a big deal. It seems to have become popular with the spread of the Aryavarta idea, which I'm talking about. And that sort of 1500 years ago, 1000 years ago, it becomes watertight. And that's really an impressive thing. Globally, they found genetically Indian caste, the neighbor who lives in the same village, and if you go to another country like say Italy and you say what happens to the two 20 kilometers away, the genetic difference, Indian genetic difference is 3 times as much, which means endogamy is so tight. Now this happens about 1500, 1000 years ago. Remember, I'm using these phrases because it is not homogeneous, right? Some parts of India it will happen first, some part in Kerala it was really strong. But when did it start? Maybe 1000 years ago. But 1000 is a long time. The 1000 years is about 10 centuries, which is 40 generations. 40 generations of endogamy is really powerful. So this is something which happens later, much later. And that is the world that the Portuguese encountered. They saw these endogamic practices and they used the word casta for it. And they were using it for their European idea of pure blood. And that's how the people of India are a sort of mix of everything.
Mix of everything. That is a good point to conclude our discussion on this thing. We are all a mixed lot, and we are spread across what we today call India, and that movement of people into these territories happened over several centuries.
Yes.
And those memories and those stories that built over, say, maybe 3000 years,
yes,
still are alive and used and misused to create unity and strife.
Yeah.
Thank you, Devdutt.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.